Have you ever had one of those dreams that disturbs and really worries you, shakes you to the core? A dream that's so powerful that you can't deny its message, that you can't ignore the warning that it's giving you. Well, I was woken in the early hours of this morning with just such a dream. Perhaps I should start at the beginning. My husband, Pilate, is the Roman governor here in this outflung little territory of Jerusalem. We've been here for a few years now, and we're getting used to the funny customs they have, the festivals, the traditions. This time now, it's the Passover time. And people have been flocking to the city from all over the place to come and celebrate this festival of Passover. This year it's been a bit different, and there's been this undercurrent of tension through the city. Just this building of tension. I don't know quite what's happening, but I can feel it. It's like a pot that's just going to boil over. Anyway, a few days ago, there was this Jewish sort of teacher, healer guy who rode into the city on a donkey, and the people were welcoming him and as a king, throwing down palm branches, singing out Hosanna. I really don't know where that's going, but anyway, last night I was aware of quite a lot of disturbance in the city. There was a lot more movement in the streets than there usually is, a bit of shouting. Oh, it's really hard to get to sleep, but finally I got to sleep only to dream. Oh dear, and such a dream. When I woke up, I knew I had to act immediately. I knew that I had to get a message to my husband. I had to do it straight away because I knew he'd been called out to hear a case in the early hours of the morning. And so I called one of the servants and I said to them, look, you've got to get this message to Pilate. Even if you have to disturb him in the middle of what he's doing, make sure he gets this message. You must tell him that I have had this dream. Tell him, don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for your wife has suffered a great deal in a dream tonight because of him. Well, the servant went and then gave the message to Pilate and came back and to let me know. The servant told me that the religious leaders had brought the man Jesus, that traveling preacher, before my husband. The religious leaders wouldn't even enter our building because of some of their strange religious laws about cleanliness or something or other. And so my husband had to go outside to meet with them. They were bringing all sorts of charges against Jesus. They were saying, oh, he's a troublemaker. He's opposing paying taxes to Caesar. They said he's claiming to be a king. Well, are you a king? My husband asked him. You have said so, said Jesus. I think my husband was quite perturbed about what to do. My message coming out of the blue made him realize that this was no common criminal, no ordinary man that he could just brush off. He told me later when we talked about it that he brought Jesus inside to question him further. It was already obvious that Jesus had been questioned pretty harshly and pretty roughly by the Jewish leaders. My husband couldn't get over the fact that Jesus remained absolutely silent as he asked him about the charges that the chief priests were bringing against him. He made no effort to defend himself about what was obviously trumped up charges. Why didn't he speak? Why didn't he just, put those charges down? But no, he just remained silent. He spoke, this Jesus, with such composure about a kingdom that isn't of this world. He seemed to believe that my husband had no authority over him except what had been given from on high. He spoke with an authority that really shook and amazed my husband. So my husband told the priests that he could find no basis for a charge against this Jesus. But they kept on agitating. When they mentioned that Jesus had come from Galilee, well, then my husband had the bright idea that he'd send him to Herod because that was Herod's jurisdiction. Personally, I think he was just passing the buck, that he was just hoping to get out of it. But it did him no good because Herod just sent Jesus back, dressed in a very elaborate robe, looking a bit worse for wear, and with the message that no, he couldn't make any of the charges against Jesus stick either. So my husband called the religious leaders together again and he said, "You brought this man to me as one who's been inciting rebellion against the people. I've examined him in your presence and found no basis for the charges against him. Neither has Herod. He's done nothing deserving of death. Therefore, I'll punish him and release him." Well, they weren't happy about that. I could hear the crowd shouting from where I was, "Crucify him, crucify him." My husband tried again. He offered the crowd the option of releasing Barabbas, who was convicted of murder and insurrection, or Jesus. Well, the crowd chose Barabbas. A third time, my husband appealed to the crowd, asking them, why should Jesus be crucified? What crime had he committed? He pointed out that he'd found no grounds for the death penalty, and he told them that he's decided to have Jesus punished and then he'd release him. He had him flogged and brought Jesus out to the crowd wearing the purple robe and a crown of thorns that the soldiers had put on his head. He was a bloodied mess by that stage. He presented him to the crowd and attempted to have him released, but the crowd were getting angrier and more agitated. They were insistent. They kept shouting and demanding blood. Crucify him, crucify him. They even started saying that they'd report my husband as somebody who was not supporting Caesar. Finally, all this pressure and wanting to keep the crowd happy and to avoid trouble, my husband gave in to their wishes. He called for water and he washed his hands and he said, "I'm innocent of this man's blood. Be it on your heads," he said to the Jews. And he handed over this innocent man to face a terrible, terrible death. I can understand in a way what made him do it, but neither he nor I will ever forget.
Mark chapter 15, reading from verse 1. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer?" See how many things they are accusing you of. But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was a custom at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews? Pilate asked them. Crucify him, they shouted. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, Crucify him. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away to the palace, that is, the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, Hail, King of the Jews! Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
Hail Caesar!
Are you reading it in?
I'm a centurion in the service of Rome. I'm a man under authority, and yet I have men under me. I have 100 men who do my beck and call. You think I need that? Today is another day in the service of Rome when the power of Rome will be enforced upon the nations that we subdue. It's a day of crucifixion. Now, crucifixion, it's a drop of blood in a small bucket for me. I've seen rivers of blood on the battlefield. This is a walk in the park. And so the day begins at the praetorium. We have 3 prisoners that we will crucify today. The procession starts like any other procession as we march with these prisoners, with crowds gathering. Weren't you in the crowd? I recognize that face. And you were in the crowd as we march towards Golgotha, the place of the skull. Here we are, 9 a.m. The 3 have been lifted up. It's like any other crucifixion. you mob, and I recognize you now. You were all there. Didn't you spit on Jesus? Yes. And you, weren't you the one insulting him? I heard the jeers of the crowd. I heard you all on that day. What was it you said? He saved others, let him save himself. Well, here he is, lifted high. "9 a.m. Then it dragged on. I get tired of crucifixions. Give me a real battle any day. But here we are. 12 o'clock comes, and suddenly the ground starts to shake beneath my feet. Is this a coincidence? What's happening? And then the sun is blotted out. Now, I've seen the times when the moon has moved across in front of the sun and there's been an eclipse, but it just moves across and there's some darkness and then there's light again. But this day was different. This day, the sun was totally blotted out for 3 hours. You could not see your hand in front of your face. This darkness penetrated my soul. It was not the darkness of night, that night that it comes and goes with the rising of the sun. No, this darkness penetrated all the way in. I was somewhat unnerved. This was not a battle that I could fight. Give me a sword and an enemy and let me crush them in the name of Rome. But this battle, I couldn't see who I was fighting against. Three o'clock in the afternoon, I gave the order for the legs to be broken. My men carried that out swiftly with a sword smashing bones. They broke the legs of those either side of this one who'd been lifted high. Pilate gave him the name, the King of the Jews. Your king. And yet you jeered and spat. They broke these legs. When I came and I looked up and I saw this so-called King of the Jews, I realized he was dead. And then the strangest thing happened. I spoke these words. I don't know where they came from. I said, surely this is the Son of God. Where did those words come from? Once they were out, I couldn't take them back. Help me. What do I do with these words?
From Mark chapter 15, verses 21 to 41. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who were going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. This is the word of the Lord.